Well, we're on the review set, so I guess this is a review?
It's not a half in the bag. It's not really a movie.
It's not a Jay and Mike Talks About, because it's not something we really loved.
Right, but it certainly needs to be talked about on today's episode of The Dahmer Show.
We have to title this episode as awkwardly as the actual show is titled.
Dahmer.
Because I think all creative decisions are made by algorithms now. So I'm assuming it was originally just called Monster, the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, or the Jeffrey Dahmer story. And they're like, well, you know, for algorithm purposes, for engagement, for mentions on Twitter, we need people to know exactly what it's called right away. So we have to call it Dahmer. So they just called it Dahmer Monster the Jeffrey Dahmer story.
Monster in my colon would have been a more awkward title. So Jay, for me, this Dahmer show just came out of nowhere. Just appeared.
Yeah.
And it was there. I hadn't heard anything about it. I'm a fan of the American Horror Story show. I still watch American Horror Stories, the anthology series, which goes from pretty good to terrible to pretty good to terrible and back and forth.
That shit's got to be like the guiltiest of guilty pleasures.
Yeah, it is. And
I don't like American Horror Story at all. And then this thing came out of nowhere, this Dahmer show. There was no build up to it, no publicity. It was just on Netflix one day. And then I saw it was from Ryan Murphy, and I was like, oh, he's the absolute worst person to touch this kind of thing, because this stuff is so over the top. But I think his involvement must have been minimal. He was a producer on it, but it doesn't have his kind of signature touch of schlock. And now it's huge. Everybody's talking about this thing. Some people really like it. Some people are angry.
Right.
Which is kind of our interest in it, our angle.
Right. I watched the first like 3 or 4 episodes, right? And I was like, I think I'm out. Because it felt voyeuristic, creepy, like, I don't know, exploitive, gross. And it's like, okay, I know this story. I'm familiar with all the events that happened in regards to Jeffrey Dahmer. I don't need to see it play out over 10 hours, you know? And I'm like, I'm out.
Yeah.
And then you said you watched all of it, and then I started reading some things where people were like mad about it and this and that, and I'm like, okay. And you said halfway through it kind of shifts focus.
I guess. I mean, we should point out, in case anyone doesn't know, Jeffrey Dahmer was based in Milwaukee. We're based in Milwaukee, so there's that angle to it, that kind of interest.
Milwaukee police found body parts in a North Side apartment, and now they wonder if they've uncovered some kind of death factory.
You and I we weren't living in Milwaukee at the time. We didn't grow up here, but you know, being from Chicago, the Chicagoland area, obviously the whole world knew about it, but it was very much on the radar when we were younger, and everyone knew who Jeffrey Dahmer was. It really was well outside the Milwaukee range, but
there is still, to this day, even before this show came around, for as long as I've been here, there's always been this kind of like Jeffrey Dahmer-shaped cloud over the city that just kind of comes out once in a while.
Yeah.
Our first studio, we should point out, we used to be closer to downtown, and we were directly across the street from one of the bars that Dahmer picked up victims at. And we would see every once in a while outside, walking down the sidewalk, the Jeffrey Dahmer walking tour.
Yes.
Where they would, and that, when talking about exploitation, that's the most extreme example of that.
Or talk about not getting your money's worth.
Yeah.
Because there's a couple bars, you know, that are known, but the Oxford apartments were demolished, as you see in the end of the film. The series, limited series. His grandma's house is still in existence in West Dallas, and there were, I think, 2 or 3 murders that happened there. The Ambrosia Chocolate Factory is no longer there. I mean, like, so much has changed, and it's like where you get the empty parking lot of the Jeffrey Dahmer apartment building. It's like, okay.
But people go visit it. Weird people, and that's the thing. I've lived in Milwaukee for 20 years. I've never felt the urge to go visit the empty lot where Dahmer's apartment building was. I'm just not interested in that kind of thing.
Sure.
But people are, and that's with this show kind of bringing attention back to Dahmer again. And there's always that talk of like, well, he's the center focus. It's taking focus away from the victims, which is what this show kind of tries to bring back. But now again, there's talk of like, oh, there should be somewhere in Milwaukee a memorial for the victims. But then people in the city saying, well, if we do that, it's just going to turn into a mecca for Jeffrey Dahmer people to come visit that.
Yeah, it's
and
true.
it'll happen again. It'll just overtake that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of always the problem. Every 3, 4, 5 years, there's a new Dahmer movie or documentary or series or something every few years. And so this is just the newest one, and it's like, what else is there? What is the point?
This
It's
is the
kind of
finale, I should say. I would propose that this is the finale. This is the be all end all.
It's definitely the biggest in terms of exposure in a long time.
Well,
because there's been like smaller movies. There's the Jeremy Renner movie.
Unless you read a book about it, you can't make a movie that encompasses all of it. It's a very long and complex story, and it has, Dahmer's bouncing around all over the place from his youth to, adolescence when he's in the army. He's living in Ohio and Miami, and yes, the majority of his killings were in Milwaukee, but there were 16 victims, and then he had all these different little nuances and obsessions and incidents, and that's why I was like, oh my God, 7 more hours of this?
Yeah.
We need different perspectives. So a movie will get all the details wrong because it's 2 hours.
Yeah.
And then this is as close as you could get to getting as most of the details in it as you can, while fudging lots of different things for dramatic purposes.
Right.
Which you have to do.
And telling the story in a non-linear way, which I don't know if it really benefits from that. I'm wondering if something that was told a little more straightforward would have helped. Because either way, it ends up shifting focus to other people about halfway through.
Yeah.
And that would be the case if it was told linear and we see him as a kid and then we see his, picking up that hitchhiker, and we just go in a linear fashion, you would still get to that point where there's neighbors, there's the cops, there's...
That would be your algorithm talking, Jay.
That's true. You got to start with the salacious stuff.
We talked about this off camera. It was at
Yeah.
the very first episode. It's just kind of mesmerizing just watching the whole scene take place.
The methodical nature of...
Yes, he's doing his thing. This is it opens with his final victim. He escapes.
It's the reason he gets caught. Yeah.
It's the reason he gets caught. And, he takes him to his apartment. You're like, oh, he's going to kill him. He's going to kill him. I mean, general, we knew.
Yeah.
If you start the first 2 episodes are him as a baby and his crazy mom screaming, and people are going to be checking out.
Well, that's where the sensationalism comes in, and that's where you start to wonder, what was the point of this? Are they really trying to honor the victims? You get to the end of the show, and they show the pictures of all the victims, and I was rolling my eyes. It's like, come on.
Browsing the Twitter verse, the internet universe,
Which is always a good idea.
Dahmer, is that nobody watched it, and everyone complained that it was, the first big stumble was that Netflix listed it in the LGBTQ plus of interest to LGBTQ plus. It's like, whoops!
I mean, technically that's true, but it's obviously not a positive portrayal.
No. So that was probably some intern. It was who's Jeffrey Dahmer?
Oh, gay? Okay.
They yanked that, right? And then you have everyone up in arms about the exploitive nature of it. Yes, these were real people that got killed by a serial killer. And so
not that long ago in the grand scheme of things.
Not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, but the same goes for every other famous serial killer. But they're like, why don't you, instead of making a movie about Jeffrey Dahmer, why don't you make a movie about all the victims and their lives? Because it's not that interesting. The problem is that people are fascinated by Jeffrey Dahmer. People are fascinated by true crime. It's very popular.
Yes.
Making money off people's misery is an industry.
Yes.
And it's just the truth. Mm-hmm. It becomes like that kind of balancing act, of tragedies, killings, terrible wars. I mean, everything that is bad makes for drama. Dahmer's an interesting, fascinating, fucked up person. He's not a good person.
Right.
He's fascinating because he is, he was not like a thrill kill kind of like murderer. He wasn't, he was a very unique sociopath.
Yes.
And that's kind of what the show explores, but to what end?
Right. And that's, I was wondering, like, yeah, you mentioned they had the LGBTQ tag on Netflix. Obviously, it's produced by Ryan Murphy. I always look, you do this too, I know, where you look at the directors of episodes. I noticed a lot of the episodes are directed by black men, and obviously Jeffrey Dahmer targeted, you know, a lot of young black men. One of the episodes is directed by Greg Araki, who did a lot of really transgressive indie movies in the 90s. So I was like, is the point of this to kind of like take back control of the narrative from for communities that were more directly affected by him? Is that the point? Because it almost doesn't matter when the target demographic for all these true crime things, there was a poll, I looked it up, a poll done earlier this year. It's soccer moms. 73% of the target audience for all this true crime shit is middle-aged women.
Don't be a pussy. Just diet right.
It's been a long time since I've seen a Dahmer film. I think I saw My Friend Dahmer. I have not seen the Jeremy Renner, or maybe I did and I just don't remember it.
I mean, it's pretty forgettable.
Okay.
The earliest one is one called The Secret Life, always with the colons, Jeffrey Dahmer, or Jeffrey Dahmer, The Secret Life, something like that. And that was made in the early 90s. That was like, that's exploitation, where it was made specifically to try and get negative attention, to draw attention to the movie. But it's also probably the most like straightforward version of it. It's just, here's the series of events that happened, but it was made super low budget, and it's not good, but it's not doing any sort of artistic flourishes or anything like this new show is trying to do.
The Son, the Holy Spirit, for the forgiveness of sin.
Well, the new thing that this series could explore in the 10 hours is the other side, is less about Dahmer and his methods and, you know, how he grew up and all that kind of stuff, but the racial component is that the cops were sort of like dismissive of a serial killer in the gay community. Gay men would disappear. They'd be looking for this person posters. What do they call them? Not wanted posters. Lost and found? What's the poster that you hang up when you can't? Missing.
The missing persons poster.
Missing persons. This person's missing. And then, you know, even the, especially...
Well, and in a predominantly black neighborhood.
Yes. And that's the like the big incident is when the young boy escapes, who's all drugged up and he's in his underwear, and people are just like, what are you doing, police? You're letting him take this, he's obviously underage, and they're like, it's some kind of gay thing, you know, whatever.
Completely dismissive of it,
very dismissive, and the neighbor would call the police, and, you know, we'll look into it, we got other things to do. And so the fact that, yes, all these people are missing and the cops aren't like knocking down every door trying to find them.
If it was a 19-year-old blonde girl, that'd be everyone coming out of the state from all over the world.
Breaking tonight, a search underway this evening for a missing woman in Butler County.
But tonight, a community vows to continue its search for a missing mom from Belle Isle.
A large search is underway for a missing woman in Bates County, Missouri.
I think that people saw those images and realized this could be my daughter, this could be my best friend.
Tonight, police in Bangor are asking for your help to find a missing woman.
Tonight, new clues in the search for Heidi Plank, a Los Angeles mother last seen more than 2 weeks ago.
She was last seen about a week ago, getting money at a Bank of America off Goldenrod Road and Hoffner Avenue in Orange County.
More than 100 people gathered in Nevada this weekend to search for a woman who was kidnapped from a Walmart.
Friends and family also say she hasn't been responding on social media like she usually does.
Police along with volunteers work towards money and as a salesperson in an athletic clothing
Did you notice the show slipped in a little wink joke? It's very subtle.
Wink joke to what?
Well, I think it's in the father's house when he's like in the living room. I don't know what he's doing, but the camera's coming in and the TV is on, and there's a Head and Shoulders shampoo commercial. There's a joke is,
oh, Head and Shoulders? Like,
what kind of shampoo does Jeffrey Dahmer use? Head and Shoulders.
If that was an intentional nod to that, then that's pretty tasteless on the part of the filmmakers.
Turn the TV off and sit.
And I think this was kind of fudged too, like his very first victim, the hitchhiker guy that he hits over the head with barbell or something.
Yeah.
Then he cuts him up and he has him in garbage bags in the back of his car and he's drinking beers and driving and he gets pulled over and the cops are like, what's in the garbage bags? I think this was in Ohio.
Okay.
And he's like, oh, lawn clippings. And I think in reality, I could be wrong, but I think the cops got called away on another more important call. And they're like, oh, yeah, we got to go. Like, okay, just drive home, blah, blah, we're not going to. But in this, they're like, you know, you look like a nice young white boy, you know, like, you got your, I think he says, like, you got your whole life ahead of you. We're not going to write you a ticket.
So you got your whole life ahead of you.
Which is like clearly reminiscent of that rapist kid who raped a girl in an alley in college. I forget his name. It starts with a B.
The public outcry still soaring tonight over a 6-month sentence slapped on former Stanford University freshman Brock Turner for sexually assaulting a 22-year-old woman while she lay unconscious next to a dumpster outside this frat house last year.
He raped some girl in an alley, and instead of getting like 10 years in prison, he got like 6 months probation because the judge was like, "You've got your whole life ahead of you, kid."
Which you don't even need to interject.
Just
more
don't
recent,
do that again.
Yeah, something like that where it's inspired by something more recent.
Yeah.
When the reality of the situation is what happened with that underage Laotian boy,
yes.
You don't even need to interject modern situations related to cops because that is the most fucked up thing. And it's still amazing to this day. It's shocking.
Yes, and those two cops did get suspended, but then they got put back on the force. But then at the end of the show, they do this like paralleling thing where they're getting awards at like the police union's ball.
Yeah.
And then the neighbor is getting like a citizen's award, and they're two very different looking events. One's in like this dumpy like room, like fluorescent lighting in the ceiling, and the other is like this grand police ball where they have like champagne and they're toasting.
Right.
That seems very like dramatized. Like, I don't know if that happened, but
I know, and one of those two cops he got promoted and he happily retired just a few years ago in like 2017, I think. So
yeah, I mean,
so that stuff dealing with them, like, you know, we got to put you on leave, and they're like, we're going to talk to the union and all that stuff, and everybody applauding them when they come back. It might be exaggerated from reality, but it's pretty close. Yeah.
And also I wanted to mention the neighbor, Glenda Cleveland, I think is a amalgamation of many different people. And then she kind of becomes sort of like a metaphor for everybody at the end.
Yeah.
Where it's like all these things probably really didn't happen with her specifically, but I know there was a neighbor of Dahmer, but Glenda Cleveland lived in the building across the street.
Okay.
And she was not there at the incident with the 14-year-old boy. It was her daughter. There's all sorts of like...
Because they show it's a reenactment, but they say in the show, like, this is the actual phone call.
Yeah.
And those are the real words spoken, but that wasn't by her?
I think it was by her, but she lived across the street.
Okay.
And her daughter had told her about what happened.
Take back the complaint.
Ultimately, when one sits down and watches Dahmer, right, what are we getting out of this?
Right.
And that's what was running through my head the whole time. I think that the positive note, I'll say, is I learned more about the victims.
Yeah. But you have to get through halfway through the show and see all the...
You gotta be in it for the long haul.
And I think for a lot of people, the early half that's focused more on Dahmer is what they want to see.
Yeah.
So I guess in that way, it's sort of subversive, but I don't know. Like when I see people online talking about this, all they're talking about is Evan Peters, and he gives a good performance, I've heard some people say his accent's a little too exaggerated, but no, he
We'll
nails it.
We'll talk about Evan Peters.
We'll talk about that in a bit, I guess. But yeah, now there's like people that are treating this as if it's not reality, that are making like thirst posts about Dahmer because Evan Peters is an attractive young man. And
what the fuck is a thirst post?
well, Grandpa, it's just people like oh, he's hot, oh, stuff like that, talking about Dahmer. And it's like, they're really talking about Evan Peters, I get it, but it's still, it's obviously not the effect that they're going for, or that you want to take away from something like this.
Yeah, that second half, that's where, like, I found the aftermath stuff to be the most interesting.
Yeah.
Like, because it deals with culture and media and fame, and like the families, what they had to go through. I don't know if the cops really called the Laotian boy's father or not, but the weird fan letters to Jeffrey Dahmer, trying to get money, Joseph Zilber buying up all of his items and putting them in a landfill
so people couldn't collect them.
So Zach Baggins couldn't get his hands on them.
Yeah.
And so, like, all that kind of stuff was interesting.
Jeffrey Dahmer's father has written a book. And my guess is it's going to sell way more copies than some comic book.
So it's not a cautionary tale.
No, you could say it's bringing attention to the fact that some of these communities are not given the proper police protection that other neighborhoods would be, but we've seen so many other versions of that.
Right.
Digging up Dahmer feels like you're doing it because Dahmer is a name.
It feels salacious in the fact that it almost feels like that's your excuse. Like, oh yeah, this is the real reason we made it. Dahmer, look at him, look at him, is he crazy? We're really having a message of social change in this. Look at Dahmer, isn't he crazy? Like, come on down to the carnival, everybody, and watch the salacious material we have on Dahmer.
Which is why I almost have a little more respect.
But we showed the pictures of the victims at the end.
Yeah, in memory of.
Right. It's just a sad fact of human beings.
People love to look at a train wreck, look at awful things. It's in our nature. I say every few years there's a new Dahmer thing, and I always say, do we really need another thing about Dahmer? And then I watch it anyway. So
it sells.
Yeah.
And it also, it's like, I think it's because people that murder, especially serial killers, is so the opposite of what a normal person would do.
And that's why I think that stuff's so popular with wine moms. They love this true crime stuff because it's a way to
it's escapism.
It's escapism. It's a way to be exposed to the darker sides of nature. Because their lives are so boring and normal in comparison.
Maybe.
True crime is like the Fight Club for soccer moms.
And they could watch some story about another soccer mom who gets murdered and be like, oh, I'm glad that didn't happen to me.
Sure.
But for people that like serial killers, I don't know how much soccer moms like serial killers. I think they just like
true crime stuff more.
Yeah, marriage has gone wrong where the husband kills the wife and buries her under the doghouse in the backyard. And, they like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Serial killers are weird guys in their 20s and 30s who listen to death metal. Or people that are just kind of fascinated by their mental state, or their compulsion to do things like this.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is like, you'll never, as much as you shout about it, you're never gonna take away that allure of famous serial killers. I mean, can you name a victim of Ted Bundy?
No.
What about John Wayne Gacy? Name a victim.
I can't.
I'm not being disrespectful here. I'm being...
No, that's what I say. And that's like, I think with this show, they're trying to bring more attention to that.
Right.
But all anyone's talking about is Evan Peters as Dahmer.
Would we consider it a bad thing to bring all this up again? I'm sure the city of Milwaukee isn't happy about it.
I mean, yeah, and that's we obviously were a little bit closer because of that, the Milwaukee connection, and I know
we bought filmmaking supplies at the same Ace Hardware where Jeffrey Dahmer would buy his
blue barrels,
Blue barrels,
yeah,
the exact same one.
Mm-hmm. I know like some of the relatives of victims are not happy about it. They've been pretty, the one that's shown in the courtroom in this that starts like screaming at him. She's been really vocal about it, saying it's re-traumatizing, and it's like, you don't want to minimize that, but at the same time, people are never going to stop being fascinated by stuff like this. So it's like, I don't know, what do you do?
So dredging it all up is serving what purpose? Obviously, the show to make money.
Yeah.
And
what are they going to do with that money? Are they going to donate anything, any amount of it, anywhere? Probably not.
Do you have to? Should you? I mean, that's even a topic in the movie itself.
Yeah.
Profiting off Dahmer.
Mm-hmm.
His father was doing it, and you know, Joseph Zilber tried to stop people from doing it.
Yeah.
Do artists, filmmakers, TV creators have a right to tell salacious stories that the public wants to hear without feeling an obligation to have it have a charitable effect?
Absolutely. This has every right to exist just as much as the Dahmer versus Jesus comic book. We have Dahmer versus Gacy upstairs on DVD. We've never watched that.
I'm sure that's quality.
I'm sure that's a great film.
You buried 30 people in the crawl space of your house. What kind of ignorant lowlife does that?
Maybe the fact that this is in a dramatized form and not a documentary makes it look different. I watched a documentary, I don't know if you watched it. It was on Hulu. It was called Captive Audience.
No.
It's about Steven Stayner, a kid in California in the 70s who was kidnapped by this weird guy when he was like 4 years old. And he was living in like a trailer community in like Yosemite National Park or somewhere super like remote. And he was like saying that the kid's his son, and he lived there for like 10 years. And then he escaped. And then it was like, oh, he's back, you know? And then it was like media explosion. They made like a TV movie about it. And Corin Nemec played little Steven Stayner in it.
Parker Lewis himself?
Parker Lewis himself, and he's interviewed in the documentary. But it's interesting because the reason why I bring it up is because they have all this audio of the producers and writers talking about how they're going to structure the TV movie. And they're like, well, the mother, she might have been a good mother, but let's have her drink a lot. And
taking a real world thing and turning it into entertainment.
Kind of like twisting certain things, and then like it just kept taking these weird twists and turns.
Wow.
But that all happened, I think that happened after the TV movie came out. The TV movie was called My Name is Stephen, or I think My Name is Stephen. And so, but the interesting note is that they were talking about ways to dramatize it.
Right.
I was lost. I turned away from God.
So you believe in God?
Yes, I do.
Towards the end, he said he wanted to get caught. Like, he was tired of doing it. He got really drunk to work up the courage to do the creepy things he did. He made sure the victims were not awake when he killed them.
He was a very Midwest serial killer. Drinking and trying to be as polite and accommodating as possible.
Sure.
Maybe I could bring some brewskis by your place and we could...
But there was something definitely wrong with his brain, and that's another angle of this series is, you know, nurture versus nature, how he was raised, and at first that was a big turnoff, like on the show. It was like, oh God, they're gonna try, it seems like they're trying to explain it, because the mom took a lot of pills when she was pregnant and was kind of a, you know, distant mother. The father was like teaching him how to do taxidermy with roadkill.
Yeah.
Just because he showed some kind of interest, but Dahmer was just like, he was just like this piece of shit, kind of boring guy.
Yeah.
Who was just like a failure at everything.
And so kind of aloof and detached.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, he was born in Milwaukee, moved to Ohio, you know, went to high school there, like did terribly in high school, but graduated. The dad sends him to Ohio State University, where he just drinks.
Yeah.
Fails there. And then they're like, well, I'll move back in for a week. You need to get a job. You're going to the Army. Goes to the Army, gets some kind of medical training, which makes him learn about drugs and stuff.
Yeah.
But eventually just keeps drinking in the Army and fails out of that.
He goes, lives with his grandma.
Before that, he says, once I get discharged from the Army, I'm going to try to live on my own in Miami.
Oh, yeah.
And he lives in a rented hotel room in Miami working at a butcher shop. And then eventually gets kicked out of the hotel and sits on the beach and drinks and then fails and then has to come back home and move in with grandma.
Yeah.
Where he works, I think at another deli and then at the chocolate factory. Not even an intelligent person, I don't think.
Yeah.
Just a complete failure of a person and with proclivity towards a weird sexual problem.
Yes.
Which that should be discussed, I suppose.
Sure.
Take it away, Jay.
Oh my God, he just wants to cuddle. He just wants to cuddle.
He doesn't want...
He wants control.
He likes control.
Yeah, and no confrontation.
But there is a big element of wanting complete control over someone, total control.
One of his early, I don't know if it was a victim or just a person he was with, but he didn't like them moving. Like either maybe during sex or after, he was getting upset by it. And so yeah, there was something going on there where he just wanted them to be submissive or controlled, and the hitchhiker guy that he killed, he enjoyed he chopped him up, he pulverized all of his bones, and he spread them around the house. And he's like, I felt good having him around. And it's there was a lot of stuff going on upstairs.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff. Not good stuff. Bad stuff going on upstairs. To where you're just like, what caused all this? And a lot of people say there's the cannibal angle, but he wasn't carving them up, and he didn't have a giant meat locker, and he wasn't consuming people 24/7. He tried it. He ate a little.
Yeah.
But he kept...
That wasn't his driving motivation.
That was one of many different things that he was up to. And it was more I want to keep these men close to me. I want to keep parts of them around. I'm going to bleach their skulls and keep them as trophies, keep one in the fridge. And it wasn't even so much about covering up the murder. The murder was the least important part for him.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is interesting is people kill because they enjoy that feeling of killing someone. But to him, that was the most unpleasant part.
Yeah. It's just something you have to do to get to the end result that you want.
Right. That's another angle, is that Jeffrey Dahmer does talk to a therapist in this, and he diagnoses him with some kind of mental issue, problem with being sexually aroused by organs, right?
There's a term for what you're describing. It's called splanchnophilia. When someone finds viscera, internal organs, sexually arousing.
And I think there's a general term, I think it's paraphiliac, where it's just sexual weirdness. It's not, it's like kinks, or just you're attracted to something that's super fucking weird. I think he talked about the organs, the sliminess of them, and he's like, it's very reminiscent of a woman's vagina. And Jeffrey Dahmer's like, okay, and Jeffrey Dahmer existed during a time in the early 90s. There was AIDS. He was gay, but his family didn't know. He was closeted. Jeffrey Dahmer probably couldn't get the help that he needed because it was so fucking far off the radar.
Yeah.
Where it's oh God, I'm having thoughts of really wanting to have this guy be unconscious in my bed for weeks, and I'm gonna, I gotta go get some pills, and I gotta go speak to a therapist. I may have something wrong with me.
Yeah.
It wasn't the kind of environment where he could come out and say that.
Yeah.
Plus, he was an alcoholic on top of everything else, which just made the problem much worse. It exacerbated the problem. So
I'm different from everybody else. There's something wrong with me, I think.
Jeff, come on, don't do this.
No, I'm serious, Dad. There's things that I want to do, and there's stuff that I've done that
that could be another kind of takeaway that one could learn from this, is that back then, Jeffrey Dahmer was in a climate and an environment where he didn't feel like he could discuss his weird fetish or his problems. Yeah. He had to resort to stealing a mannequin and sleeping with it in his bed. Mm-hmm. Maybe in today's world, someone would be like, I think I kind of want to do these bad things. Maybe I should talk to somebody. Yeah. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of what young people would learn from this.
I just got an idea.
That's what's fascinating, is like what was wrong with his brain. How did this happen? People are complex, brains are complex, but it's just like 1 in a million.
Yeah.
He's like the opposite of like Einstein. Einstein.
He's the polar opposite. Yeah.
Einstein, brilliant physicist, 1 in a million, maybe even more than that, right? And then you got Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah.
Just a
most people, piece of shit.
Most people are average. Most people are average. Every now and then there's someone that reaches to the top or reaches to the bottom of the spectrum of life. Mm-hmm. Intelligence, weirdness, eccentricity,
desires,
just flat out talent. There's all sorts of components that make up people, but Jeffrey Dahmer he had all of the bad ones.
Yeah.
Maybe if Jeffrey Dahmer had looked more like John Wayne Gacy, he would have had a harder time bringing men home from the bar.
Come home with me.
Yeah, that's another case of you look at Gacy and you're like, oh yeah, that guy's a fucking serial killer. Dahmer looks like just generic Midwest man.
Right. Which is how...
because that's sort of Ted Bundy's thing, is he's a good-looking guy.
Ted Bundy was, different.
Yeah, but Dahmer's just tiny bit of a mullet back there and just goofy glasses.
Very unassuming. And that's probably what, had the cops stopped Gacy with the Laotian boy,
he's my boyfriend.
And they're like, yeah, no.
No.
Dahmer, maybe.
Yeah.
I always found one thing interesting. I'm sure others have noted there's not really that many similarities between Dahmer and Cobain. Kurt Cobain and Jeffrey Dahmer. I think it was just the fact that I was growing up, coming of age. They both existed on the world stage for almost the exact amount of time. And they look similar too. Nevermind came out in 91. Dahmer got caught in 91. They both exploded on the world stage.
Yeah.
And then in 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer gets murdered in prison. And in 1994, Kurt Cobain gets murdered above his garage in a room.
Gets murdered?
Well, Kurt Cobain died by a shotgun blast to the head. Jeffrey Dahmer was bludgeoned with an Allen wrench. Yes, we know that Jeffrey Dahmer loved Exorcist Part 3.
Yes.
We also know he loved The Emperor.
Return of the Jedi. The Emperor is so fucking cool.
Which they don't really mention that in this.
Yeah.
Do they mention the Emperor? I know he wears the contacts at some point, but...
Well, he's like, you ever see Return of the Jedi?
Oh, he does mention it. That's right. Okay.
Yeah, I think they're watching it.
Yeah. Well, they probably didn't show footage from it.
They didn't. They had sound-alike
Disney,
Star Wars-y music.
Yeah, that's
underneath.
right. Now I remember.
Yeah.
You hear like laser blasts or something.
Yeah, you hear some kind of like
Disney wasn't going to okay
music.
that.
No.
Exorcist 3, probably pretty cheap to license a clip from that.
Right.
Although it was very inaccurate when he's fast-forwarding and rewinding.
There's the guy who plays Zilber is an actor from The Exorcist Part 3.
But the priest, Father Dyer, Joseph Dyer.
There's a lot of actors in this that show up for like one scene where I recognized them, but they look a lot older than when I remember them. What I remember them from. Ari Gross shows up. He's like the lawyer in prison talking to Dahmer and his dad. That guy was in a lot of stuff in the 90s.
Before you have a chance to type it, yes, I recognize Linda Park from Star Trek Enterprise. Stop it. Stop it! So, Jay, are we done talking? Oh, real quick, Evan Peters.
Evan Peters nails the voice. He's too attractive to really be Dahmer, but they do a pretty good job of frumping him down.
You know, I like Evan Peters a lot. He's really good, and he does an impression of Dahmer really well, right? He obviously studied all of his interviews and got his mannerisms spot on. And Evan Peters was a good choice because he's like in his early 30s, I think, and Dahmer, the story required Dahmer to go from like high school to like 30s, from like high school to prison, and Evan Peters could do that. He has sort of a boyish face.
Yeah.
But he's a little too, he wasn't scary as Dahmer. He just has that like little round boyish face. He looks like the Pillsbury Doughboy, like a thin version of that, you know.
Yeah.
And Dahmer, when you see him in the courtroom, you know, and he's just like, he's creepier.
There's
Evan
nothing
Peters
there.
is not creepy.
Yeah. But that aloofness, he certainly captures that kind of just.
Yeah, I that was a joy in the show, is listening to all of his excuses. Just, I don't know.
It's one of those things out of context of the show. It's very funny. Obviously, it's not supposed to be funny,
It's
but
not supposed to be funny.
There's so many parts of the show where people are just asking him, his dad or whoever, or his neighbor, like, what's that smell? And he just, excuse after excuse, without even really thinking about it. They just keep coming to him. And nobody takes him seriously or looks further into it.
Well, you know, I had that meat that went bad. I can't really sleep, so I just do yard work, and I just did it on a dare. The whole thing was just a joke.
You use that saw to cut up roadkill?
It's big enough. Yeah. Might have been the barbecue. I was trying out a new way to cook it. No, it's just like my stuff, like baseball cards.
You're not gonna tell me, are you?
No, because they're just like beyond the realm of possibility that he could be doing this. I mean, I kind of get that, but...
Because he's not combative at all. Like some people, when you confront them about something, they might get more and more worked up. It makes him look more guilty. He's just so detached from everything when he talks.
Yeah, so as a performance, as an actor, you know, he's great, but I think maybe some unknown who wasn't famous, who had more of a imposing, scarier look to him. He just looks so like wholesome. There's something spooky about him, and if their goal was to kind of make Dahmer sympathetic, Evan Peters is a good choice. But if the goal is to like make you hate him, which it should be, you maybe cast an actor who looks more like the real Dahmer. I don't know, Grandma. Jeff! I always do the grandma voice as Biff Tannen's grandma. Jeff! Where are you going?
Where are you coming home?
Told you, Grandma, I'm going to the dance.
I gotta be home. Bath! Bath!
Well, Jay, we talked a lot about Jeffrey Dahmer.
We talked about the good things about this new series, the bad things, the questionable things. We brought up the idea of what do you get out of this? And I don't think we're any closer to the answer.
No.
People's fascination with this stuff is never going away, so things like this will keep getting made. Friends and family of the victims will keep getting upset. And there's nothing that's going to change about that. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, that's well stated. Well stated.
I mean, I guess there could be people that are younger that don't know about Jeffrey Dahmer, and this is their first exposure to it. And hopefully they realize it's a real thing. Like the Titanic. Oh, that really happens?
Yeah. So maybe better policing, Cops, listen to the lady who calls you who says someone's being murdered next door.
Yeah.
Do that. And if you feel like maybe you want to drill a hole through someone's skull, go tell somebody and talk to a therapist about it.
That's probably a good idea.
These are my 2 takeaways.
Okay.
These are things that could be learned from the Jeffrey Dahmer, and Ryan Murphy just made a whole bunch of fucking money.
Mm.
And I hope he gives it to all the people that are constantly being tormented because this happened to their relative. Buy him a nice new car. That'll make it better. Thanks for watching. And try Usinger sausage, Milwaukee's best sausage.